And I'm really happy that all of the students are here as well. So hello, students. Yay. We have a hello from Zhang. Yes, everybody say hello. Okay, we're gonna kick off. Thank you so much to Jan and to the Huawei team for organizing this event. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you guys again. Today, we are going to be exploring essentially, no screen sharing. Bizarre. Jan, can you enable screen sharing?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Is that okay?
Super duper. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.
So this session is essentially going to be an exploration of the renaissance of ecological civilization and the art of quantum maths. So specifically the book 9 chapters on the mathematical art that was edited by Liu Hui in so here's a broad outline of this talk. We will essentially cover nature, cultures, co-creation, and maths. The fact that within maths, we must make the distinction between prices are not the same as values, and that languages and cultures matter. And then there's the opportunity essentially for us to build, much better civilizations and ecosystems that combine technology, culture, languages, and our human values within them. And we bake them at grassroots level. So and this is the point where essentially Microsoft plays up. So I couldn't insert this. So essentially at COP26, President Xi gave a fantastic talk and a call to action and a reminder essentially to our souls that very much in the Taoist tradition, we are born of the earth, of the universe, and everything that we do must steward, shepherd, and cherish those origins, those very natural origins of ours that are so core to our Taoist soul and our beliefs. So I'm just going to show this very short video.
一合一生，各得其养以成。生物多样性使地球充满生机，也是人类生存和发展的基础。为了我们共同的未来，我们要携手同行，开启人类高质量发展新征程。第一，以生态文明建设为引领，协调人与自然关系。第二，以绿色转型为驱动，助力全球可持续发展。第三，以人民福祉为中心，促进社会公平正义。第四，以国际法为基础，维护公平合理的国际治理体系。
President Xi was here to do in the video presentation with a quite comprehensive statement and speech, which was quite impressive.
今天啊，习主席在这个会上的重要讲话真是备受鼓舞。他讲的其中就是开启人类高质量发展的新征程，这对于我们中国也好，甚至乃是全球也好，今后的发展指明了一个方向。
China is a mega biodiverse country, and all the targets, plans, and policies that he announced will contribute not only to China but to the rest of the world.
I have a good feeling that in the future, with this commitment from Xi Jinping, I think we have more possibilities to cooperate on the topic of biodiversity.
The president's speech is so important for me and for Africa and for the world, because it's in harmony with nature, and he wants us to push in the same direction of bringing peace between nature and human beings.
前段时间云南大象的北上及返回之旅，让我们看到了中国保护野生动物的成果。人不负青山，青山定不负人。生态文明是人类文明发展的历史趋势，让我们携起手来，秉持生态文明理念，站在为子孙后代负责的高度，共同构建地球生命共同体，共同建设清洁美丽的世界。
So this is essentially a vision that has been with the Chinese for thousands of years. I get very emotional about it because nature just means so much to myself and the way that I was brought up. And the way that President Xi speaks about it is exactly the same way that my father spoke to me about it. So for me, it is a calling for me to do my part. So sorry, let me sort of talk about specific projects and why I, became involved with Huawei, because I was lucky enough to be at Huawei Developers Day, the first one that they had in Europe, and I saw this project that they're doing with the Rainforest Connection.
We're in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica. It's one of the most biologically intense places on Earth, where we actually use AI techniques, machine learning, to be able to pick out the sound of individual species of animals, like spider monkeys. We're really excited for the next level, where Huawei is actually giving us tools and model arts, Huawei Cloud, to be able to auto-train, pick out the sounds of animals, and actually their emotions and the things they're feeling.
蜘蛛猴声音识别的挑战主要有2点，第一点是蜘蛛猴声音的样本比较稀少，一般人都没有听过。
We know where are the population of the monkeys. We can focus our conservation efforts to these areas.
With AI technology, we're working to collectively empower the ecologists, biologists, scientists, and environmental defenders around the world who can make the most difference.
So I saw this wonderful California team collaborating with Huawei, and I also saw StorySign, which is making AI much more accessible and applying it to enable hearing impaired children to learn how to read and communicate. And so for me, as emotional as it is, I feel incredibly optimistic about, the potential for all of us to do good, and to work with, to work with each other, essentially to make the planet and, our civilization better. And as I've been, trying to analyze strategically in terms of, the big pieces, I'm hugely encouraged by the fact that China and India and their ancient wisdoms and their connection with, the holistic approach to Earth is really going to be so transformative and so directional for us. So this is some satellite data from NASA, which shows that China and India are leading in the greening of the planet. What's happened in China over the last 25 or so years is that there was an initiative that started to essentially reforest the edges of the Gobi Desert, because what happened was that the sandstorms were blowing into, the major cities of China, and they were causing pollution and health issues for people. So the immediate thought of CPC was to, as much as possible, regenerate essentially the health of the region by reforestation. So they systematically planted, like absolutely thousands of miles of saplings. And over, the 20 or 30 years that this policy initiative has actually been actioned, China has built a Great Green Wall. And so when NASA satellites go over China now, they are seeing that China is making the planet greener. And for me, that was just such a, bright ray of sunshine when I saw those satellite images. And as I've been talking to, people within AI about, how can we borrow from indigenous wisdoms to inform the way that we're designing and architecting and building and coding AI, I go back to, these ancient wisdoms. So in the case of, the Indians, they have Hinduism and the Vedas. And the Vedas have been around since 1500 to 500 BC. So there are 20,379 mantras within the 4 different sections of the Vedas, written in Sanskrit, absolutely beautiful language that I would love to learn, in depth. And I've shown here an image of Vishnu, who, alongside his, 2 brothers of Shiva and Krishna, are the ones who are responsible essentially for creation, protection, and destruction, right, of the universe. And at the moment, and I've chosen specifically Vishnu because he's the protector, right? And that's what we really need to do. So we need to go to these ancient wisdoms and protect the planet as best as we can, and figure out, how do we apply the AI to protect the planet and to protect, the people ecology of the planet. And then obviously, in Chinese culture, we have Taoism, which are the ways of nature. And Taoism is traceable to absolutely, thousands and thousands of years. It's, in terms of our earliest writings, they are 7,300 years old. So one of the earliest depictions of Nuwa, Mother Nature, was actually in pottery that was discovered in Anhui province only about 2 years ago. And it's been carbon dated to over 7,300 years. And everything about our hexagrams essentially center us within Earth and our relationship with nature. whether it's the water, whether it's the air, whether it's the earth, whether it's the fire, everything has to be holistic and natural. And so, you know, we live in times when a president calls us to action. And so, you know, it's just for me as an AI person where, you know, the AI has abstracted away, you know, nature and abstracted away all of these rich cultures. I just feel incredibly hopeful and optimistic that, you know, now we have a real opportunity to restore these ancient wisdoms. And the other aspect of it is that, you know, these ancient wisdoms actually have a mathematical root that haven't been essentially explored or, you know, been made aware in the Western world. So for example, in Hinduism, there's the tetralemma. And all of these things are essentially about, you know, examining what the truth is, not just the truth in terms of the external observed truth, but also the internal truths, our internal relationships with nature and what we perceive to be, you know, natural reality. In the case of Taoism, we actually have 16 potential truths because the Chinese language is so complex and so coherent and so beautiful, and it's all about dance and it's about music and lyricism, that we end up having essentially, you know, 16 potential truths. And if you could read Chinese, there are literally only 3 Chinese characters, fei, but fei, right? And yet those characters in different combinations produce 16 potential truths. And this contrasts against, for example, you know, the Western epistemology of Aristotle, which is, you know, the binary problem of dualism, and specifically divisive dualism. So either something is absolutely true or absolutely false. So you've got a thumbs up or you've got a thumbs down. There is no, you know, potential nuance or, you know, examination of the internal. And so for me, you know, in my AI journey, part of the frustrations with Aristotelian logic is because it is lacking, you know, and it's limiting our potential, and in particular our potential with nature, and to contextualize ourselves within nature and to apply AI to actually help ourselves within nature. So the problem with, you know, the Aristotelian logic is that over 2,000 years, different Western philosophers have actually, you know, had fantastic insights, such as, you know, Marcus Aurelius, who talks about the importance of dimensions, of the importance of perspectives, the importance of examining, you know, what exactly is truth. Are we, you know, standing in somebody else's shoes? Are we seeing with somebody else's eyes? Are we opening up our hearts, right? To actually try to genuinely understand their souls and their perspectives and why they've arrived at, you know, whatever their construct of reality is. You know, we have people like Heidegger, who talks about, you know, space and time. We have people like Hegel, who talk about the important need for dialectics, where something is not absolute, where we are in continuous dialogue with each other, across cultures, between cultures, with ourselves, understanding ourselves. And the unfortunate thing is, because the Western paradigm has been so stuck with, you know, Aristotle's binary dualism, we're actually losing, you know, our ability essentially to understand ourselves as well as understand each other and understand nature. So the situation that we've gotten into is that we have a lot of numbers, right? I know that there are a few accounting students in this session. And we all recognize this. This is, you know, the balance sheet, an Excel spreadsheet. It has these equations, it has these definitions, these, you know, mathematical representations of words. And I want to highlight, you know, two line items in particular. Face value, right? Which is in so many ways, it's like the superficie of a like button, right? A click, a swipe left or a swipe right, it's face value information. And also this, you know, line item of price. And I want everybody to look at these two line items and to understand that the number of the price is not the same as the face value. And both of them are not the same as values in terms of, you know, really substantive values in terms of, you know, our hearts, our souls, right? Our connections with each other, our ability to communicate and understand each other. These are purely superficial number constructs that don't actually have any substantial meaning, right? And ours is the opportunity in ecological civilization to actually reimagine these numbers, to make new numbers, to co-create new metrics. And this is the opportunity, right, that's ahead for students, as well as for, you know, any generation, essentially, of inventors, of systems designers, right, of imagineers. And at the moment, we're in a situation where we have a pathway towards this virtual world whereby the Bored Ape NFT, right, a virtual bit of maths is worth $300,000, or Beeple's collage is worth $69 million, right? And yet the pandemic has shown us what real values are, right? Real values are our relationships with each other, those hugs, those words of kindness, you know, words of comfort, sensations, right? Unspoken communications between people that reconnect us to each other and reconnect us to the fact that we're an intrinsic part of nature and we are alive, and we're alive with each other. And that life has value that's very deep. And so therefore, we need to essentially, you know, co-create those deep and complex metrics, right? We need to be aware of, you know, these are the balance sheets, these are the meaningless numbers. How are we now going to take those meaningless numbers and give meaning to them, add dimensions to them, add perspectives to them, add cultures to them, add our souls and our hearts to these numbers? These are things that, you know, I've been thinking about for a long time. And I am going to show this video, this documentary that I was in over a dozen years ago, also featuring Sir Anthony Gormley, the sculptor, and two neuroscientists. It's not particularly well structured, it's quite chaotic, but it is a collective effort of preserving global consciousness and ensuring that it's moving with a good velocity.
We probably experience about 1,000 numbers an hour, 1,000 numbers a day, 6 million numbers.
We're like 10% of information that we need to be. Same thing is true. Back all nervous system.
I think that sculpture is in the age of the internet so utterly important because it brings us back to that presence of thingness.
We do
Dwayne, apologies. Could you please turn on the subtitles? I cannot hear so well.
I will actually send the link to that documentary in the chat.
Thanks.
So let me just do that first. So I've been thinking about these things for, I mean, pretty much since childhood, because I was so lucky with, my parents raising me essentially embedded in nature, and with such a huge love for nature. And so even though when I'm studying mathematics and, and I can see that, nature and culture have been abstracted out of the mathematics, it concerns me. And so over time, I've been essentially, unknotting the strings of how did we arrive at these numbers? And so I've dived essentially into specifically, the history of Chinese mathematics and the path to 9 chapters of mathematical arts. And so this was essentially a compilation of, different mathematicians since the 10th century BC that eventually culminated in, the tome that was the Chinese equivalent of, Euclid's Elements in 263 AD. And the editor was Liu Hui, who also, as well as, editing the mathematicians who preceded him, he also invented a number of techniques in terms of, calculus techniques, as well as, linearizations, as well as calculating the Chinese version of pi. So there is actually, an independent version of pi that's very distinctively Chinese. So there's this rich tradition essentially of, number theory in Chinese science. And in 500 BC, there are, a number of texts written about, the Chinese approach of, counting rods that then subsequently became, the abacus, and a whole lot of literature about, how the counting rods was used in terms of, within the context of commerce and within the context of, using it as a scale of measurement. And then when we trace essentially, how the Chinese maths is then connected with Western maths, we find that the route is through Indian maths. So Indian maths, and my working assumption is that a lot of the maths transmission happened along the old Silk route, right? The old Silk Road, which, essentially first became a system during the Han era, or circa, 206 BC. So a lot of, knowledge transmission, knowledge transfer happened because of, those commercial routes between, China, India, and the Arab countries. And then in the 11th and 12th century, the Arab maths then migrated north with the Moors into Spain. And when it arrived in Spain, that is actually when, people actually had to rethink from Roman numerals to Greek alphabets. And the whole question of, what exactly is X? How do we actually, make that into some type of, mathematical language? So it's absolutely, there's a lot of rich history and context, essentially, in terms of how number theory evolved between the different cultures and informed the different cultures. Now, specifically in terms of AI and how we arrived at this, the binary logic substrate of computers, I discovered that the Western thinkers, I mean, even prior to Leibniz, became interested in essentially, all things Chinese round about, the 1630s. And so people were writing about, who are these strange people, right? They speak a different language from us. They look differently from us. And yet they have this number system. And what happened was that, Leibniz was absolutely fascinated by Chinese science, Chinese culture. And he, even when he was, 18 and starting his PhD, he was interested in, trying to translate some of the Chinese materials over into the Western schema. The unfortunate thing was that, and this always happens in, in translation situations, right? Things got lost in translation. So he rotated our hexagrams. And the hexagrams typically are read horizontally, and they actually have specific meanings in terms of, they are in relation to natural phenomena. And they also signify, female and male qualities, not just quantities, but qualities. So within yin yang, we do not assume that things are absolute. We assume that things are intermingled, that there is good and there is bad, that things are round and they are square, right? And there are, 16 potential truths for that reason, simply because we do not assume absolutes. We're never binary, we're never zero sum about anything. We're always constantly composing, right, and adding perspectives and trying to understand, well, when we examine it, from this perspective, how does this change our dimensions of truth? But Leibniz, because he was trying to be strict to the Aristotelian logic, and also because he was, at the time, he was also thinking about becoming a lawyer. And, in Western legal systems, there are the 12 good men who deliberate upon examination of evidence. And ultimately, the result is either a yes, they are guilty, or a no, they're not guilty. And again, that's an example essentially of the binary outcome, guilty or not guilty. And that is very dualistic. One of the, challenges for Leibniz was, his question was like, well, people are biased, right? People have like very different opinions. I want to create a system that in his mind was logical and would arrive most efficiently, at either a yes or a no, so a 0 or a 1. And so when he saw the Chinese hexagrams, I think what happened was that he did his own confirmation bias, and he assumed that the hexagrams also were 0s and 1s, whereas in actual fact, they're not 0s and 1s at all. And Leibniz, in his confirmation bias, what he did was he actually rotated the hexagrams just so that it would actually fit his own cognitive biases. And so then, once he had rotated the hexagrams, to him, the gaps then looked like 0s, and then the straight stroke looked like 1s. And so then he was like, oh yeah, so everything then becomes a 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. And that eventually became essentially, the birth of binary code that underpins a lot of computing today. So it was an error on Leibniz's part, unfortunately, because the Chinese hexagrams are definitely about the integration between female and male qualities, very yin yang, very dynamic, a lot more potential than the limitations of Leibniz's translations. So we, from Leibniz, inherited these linear equations. So as well as misinterpreting the Chinese hexagrams, he also, from the 9 chapters on the mathematical arts written by, edited by Liu Hui, he borrowed a number of the matrix approaches. And in 1678, he wrote what subsequently became, Gaussian elimination. And then when we fast forward, this is how we ended up, getting these linear equations. So this is, a typical linear equation with, the xy and the intercept and the, the gradient of the graph. That then has affected how we do natural language AI. And this, what I'm showing at the bottom of the slide is essentially word to vec. So what we do is we make these assumptions, these linear relationship assumptions between, again, these dual opposites of woman or man, queen or king, big and biggest, small and smallest. And this sort of formalization happened within the vector space model during the 1950s. So around about 1953, 1954, it started to be formalized in this way. And then it became generalized, as it were, at Cornell University, circa 1962, 1963. And at the same time, in 1957, Noam Chomsky had written a book which was on syntactic grammar. And so at the time, Chomsky was also borrowing these sort of, linear relationships as part of his thinking through about, generative grammar, which brings us to our current situation, unfortunately, which is where word to vec is now the integral root component of most of the natural language transformers. So whether it is BERT, whether it is OpenAI GPT-3, or whether it is Facebook social graph. So when we make the assumptions that the machine understands us, in actual fact, it doesn't. So we may type in something like cerveza, beer, but the linearization and the way that the matrix is constructed actually deconstructs and reduces all language to these binary limits. So you have the 0, you have the 1, and then you have some type of bell curve percentage distribution of how many times the word has appeared. So all of the context, all of the culture, all of the understanding, unfortunately, has been erased. So we are in a situation where the biggest US companies are having difficulty understanding truth. Again, because in part because of Aristotle's logic basis, and then building on top of that, Leibniz's errors. And the worst thing is that it's presenting a real headache for us in terms of, divisions, in terms of disinformation, in terms of truth, reality, reliability. Can we trust the medical profession? Can we trust politicians? Can we trust the media? What can we trust? What can't we trust? all of these things have essentially been affected because of the maths. One of the things that, I discovered during my, analysis was how much it's almost, a cascade effect. So most of our technologies are contingent upon, us being able to formalize the mathematics. So to represent whatever we want to in mathematical terms. And the mathematics then runs, whether it's the physics or the chemistry or the biology, it runs social sciences, it runs economics, it runs, our interactions online. So if, the top line mathematics is incorrect, the logic is incorrect, then, the cascade effect in terms of, consequences, right, is simply unhelpful for us to be able to reason, for us to be able to communicate with each other and understand each other, relate to each other, love each other, take care of each other. And so, we're in this moment where we have this huge, potential and opportunity ahead of us. Yet, we also have these technical constraints, which are, the legacy technology that we've inherited. So we need to, really go back to nature. And so for me, I literally am going back to what are in those Taoist hexagrams that Leibniz misinterpreted. What is a context? What is a culture, right, of those hexagrams? What are all the missing variables? What are the implicit, tacit knowledge that thousands of years of, the ancient Chinese scientists, what did they know? What did they write down? And Chinese as a language is so much a representation of nature in every way, in every stroke, in its lyricism, in its music, in its song and dance, literally. So for example, this, this is the character for love. And what we can see is, the top of the radical, so the blue part of the radical is a reference to breathe in, right? It's a reminder of us to take in nature's oxygen, to regenerate and to generate, right? And when we breathe in, it goes through the heart. Notice it does not say, it goes through a balance sheet. It does not say, it doesn't say, oh, it goes through some, it doesn't go through a steam engine or a piston or, the barrel of a gun. It says, breathe in to the heart, right? And when we breathe in together, right, we create friendship, right? And which is the purple, the yao, right? And it's gracious movement. Because so gracious movement, the other thing about Chinese is that there are homophones and homonyms. So phonetically, we say something and there's so many dimensions of, meaning, right? Implicit meanings. So the word for gracious movement is the same as the word for friendship, right? We move in grace towards each other, right? And so oftentimes when I've been analyzing, for example, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And it's just so counter to, Chinese philosophy and practices, to Taoist, philosophy and practices. Because Descartes, I think, therefore I am, is just so egocentric. And it's so unitary, it's so singular. It's him, saying that the object that he's observing is nothing. He is the only, entity, right? only observer, right, is a value. Whereas with the Chinese system, it's a case of like the observer has inner subjectivity, has grace, right? And at the same time, that grace also transmits in terms of friendship with other people, right? And we're continuously learning with other people and within the context of nature. So I've gone back to, the original hexagrams as well as Chinese writing and all of the cultural context. And I know, because the wonders of quantum tells me that with the block sphere, what it means is that we're no longer just dealing with, the linear algebra that Leibniz constructed. Potentially, we're dealing with essentially a complex coherency of waves, of points, of continuous and discontinuous mathematics. Literally, it's 16 potential truths from the traditional Taoist science. So it completely opens up the space-time dimensions of possibilities in terms of, how do we actually assign variables and have those variables communicating with each other in a coherent way, in much the same way that, the Chinese character for love is composed of many variables. And yet, so whether it is breath, whether it is the heart, whether it's gracious movement, and each one of those components is whole of and in itself. And then the collective is even more whole, even more complementary, even more coherent, and increases the potential. And so that's why I've been so emotional for, ever since I saw the COP26 video. And so I want to just say that the other thing that is fantastic is that now, like literally just last month, they launched the Quantum Developers Platform. And again, it all goes back to, these questions essentially about the deepest, absolutely the deepest part of, all of our souls, which is nature. And so I'm just, I just feel very emotional about, the call to action and the opportunity ahead of us to, create these new metrics that have much more dimensions, that are inclusive of cultures, that actually value, cultures, right, in their truest form, and where, all of our heritages and all of our truths can emerge and can cohere, and whereby, we can take those metrics essentially and build new economic models that can do, demand and supply in completely innovative ways, where we are looking, deeper than face value, deeper than price, and actually towards meaningful matter, the meaningful matter that is us, our relationships with each other, our ability to understand each other, to love each other, and to love the planet. And so with that, I'm going to end and take questions.
I will start if that's okay. Thank you very much for presenting this. I was really looking forward to learn more about your approach and the path that we could take, or paths, right? It's more than one. I'm wondering, so for example, I'm a cultural scientist by training originally. I transitioned into the tech industry, and I do want to make it the purpose for the rest of my life to help build this future that you were just talking about. What do I need to do? What do I need to learn? Do I need to learn Mandarin? Do I need to learn Taoist math? What do I have to do?
The most important thing is to really value, your own culture. That is the most important thing for all of us, is to value each of our own cultures and to get, into a deep relationship with our own cultures, our own anthropologies, our own histories. Because so much of AI at the moment is actually reducing and regressing, that information. And so it's actually, a lot of the AI is actually obfuscating the cultural heritage. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes I think the best thing to do is to actually go to a library, an old library, and literally just, find the books, those old books from, 1930s or like first editions of 1850s books, and to read, right, in your own language, and then to say, oh, this is interesting. There used to be this word, right, for a hill, for example. There used to be this amazing word for a hill. And now, this word has been transformed into this, new word. And let me try to somehow map the heritages of my own language and my own cultures. So that's what I would say. That's the most important thing, is to cherish your culture. It's not to sort of, oh, everybody now has to learn Arabic, or everybody now has to learn, Hindi, or, any of those things. It is actually to get deeper into, your own culture and languages, whilst being aware of, colleagues and friends.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting answer. And actually, I've been doing that from my life when I started studying. And I also started now with coaching. So to learn myself better, right? Who am I as a sensory system in this world? And I do now go into the deeper experience of myself and the surrounding and the people that I'm with. And it opens up a completely different world. And I guess that's sort of a first step of, awareness or whatever. Thanks.
Questions, please feel free.
Hey, I suppose for me, it's such a compelling call to action. And for me, this was not so much learning the AI, but really learning more about you relationally. And I felt really connected to the words that you expressed. But in the end, I don't know how to support except by just continuing to do what we do, which is to get to know one another across the world and learn more about you and each of us, like as an individual, including you, Eva. I had experiences, not really a question, but when I lived in San Antonio, there's a deep cultural, like Mexican heritage. And I worked with an organization and a woman who was not Mexican, but just lived in San Antonio for so long that she just was adopted by the Mexican heritage. And it's really beautiful to me to see how beautifully that we can blend together and just create something so wholesome that, I mean, it seems like the only way forward. And I think that that's what you presented today. And I just really appreciated being a part of that.
Thank you, Tiff. You know, there's just so many wonderful cultures around the world. And so part of my concern, you know, in terms of the AI is when, you know, everything gets converted, you know, into those meaningless numbers. And we end up, you know, losing language meaning and, you know, losing cultural context. And if, you know, I mean, my preference would be, and that's why I say that, you know, it's vital that each of us treasures and, you know, cherishes our cultures, right? Our own cultural languages. Because yes, there is a, you know, common language in terms of English, but there's also so much context and so much richness, right, in our own languages, and how much of our own languages essentially affect our neuroscience. So there is this, you know, very recent neuroscience out of MIT by Ev Fedorenko, in which she talks about, you know, how language shapes our brains, and it's really important because we do not want we don't want everybody to think the same. We don't want some type of, you know, homogeneous mass. What we actually want is, you know, us to be intelligent within the context of our cultures and within the context of nature, rather than, you know, everything just becoming the same. Because there is that, the beauty is actually in those differences, those cultural differences. So I'm just going to send this, and you can see, you know, if you speak a different language, it activates different parts of your brain. And so, you know, when different parts of your brain are activated, the language helps you to relate to whatever you're seeing, and, you know, how you're imagining things. And, you know, in the case of, you know, a language like Chinese, both in terms of, you know, symbolic representation, as well as in terms of, you know, the homonyms, as well as in terms of the dynamic flow of characters, it's very different from English, which is also very different from, you know, the Romance languages. And, you know, one of the challenges for AI when we're doing those conversions, you know, those tokenizations, right? So what we typically do is we take a word and we break it down into, you know, different strings, right? That we then try to recombine together. What happens during that process is that we actually lose a lot of intelligence. And so that is my, you know, that's my main concern, if we stay within, you know, the linear paradigm, which is why I'm really hopeful about, you know, what we might be able to do with quantum, so that we can persist more of people's cultures and people's languages, and, you know, the understanding.
Dwayne, so I would like to say thank you very much. it was not a typical HSD event or an HDG event we have so far. So it was completely different. And this is about you, because what I see and I remember my first impression when we met 2 years ago in London, so that you are really big fan of what you are doing. So, and what you're talking about. So, and it's so exciting to see that people is, I would say, falling in love with what he's doing. Yeah. So this is about you. I really appreciate, and the topic you so raised today and you described is very important. So I can say that it's very important for people who are living abroad, and so probably we must don't forget about our roots and about our culture. So thank you for reminding this to all of us. Twain, appreciate.
It's really important because, you know, a lot of the frameworks, right? The frameworks typically at the moment, they come out of Silicon Valley. Now, as engineers, we know that we know the makeup of, you know, the Valley engineers. They might not necessarily speak another language. They might not speak another European language. They might not speak an Arab language. They might not speak an African language. They might not speak an Indian language. They might lack, you know, the cultural context. And, you know, something about maths is with maths, we try to represent something, right, with the mathematics. But often the maths that we construct does not represent the thing that we're trying to represent. And, you know, if we continue to use the wrong type of mathematics in AI, particularly with language, then there is an erosion of, you know, many cultures, many values, many languages. And so that's why it's really important for us to hold on to our cultures and to cherish them. And whenever we're coding, you know, as engineers, and we're designing, you know, the AI, even something as simple as what pieces of information are you including in the database to make it searchable, right? Are you only including English, or are you also including Swahili? Are you also including, you know, Spanish? Are you also including Chinese? Are you including a good representation of women? So for example, you know, I did an app for, you know, the Science Museum on, you know, famous scientists through history. Now, maybe if somebody in Silicon Valley had coded it, they might only say, well, I'm in my database, I'm going to put Newton, Einstein, you know, Darwin, the usual suspects, right? But as engineers, we have to remember always to look with multiple cultural lenses, right? That is good practice. We must always look with, you know, multiple cultural lenses. So it is, you know, it is extra effort on our part, but that extra effort is vital because it also helps us to stay intelligent, right? So what do? We say, well, okay, let me go and research all of the African-American inventors. Let me go and research all of the Indian inventors. Let me research all of the Scandinavian inventors. Let me go and research all of the African inventors. Let me research all of the Chinese inventors. And so I'm going to, you know, make the database, the searchable database, as cultural as possible, right? And so when that young person comes in and they're doing, you know, they're doing their voice activation, they say, tell me about, you know, a scientist, the machine, the AI, can then call up the database and say, did you know that Emmett Chappell, right, is this amazing African-American scientist who invented bioluminescence, right? Did you know that Patricia Bath is the reason why you have, laser eye surgery? Did you know that the first person to win the Wolf Prize in physics is actually a Chinese woman, right? So don't assume, right? And that is a way to do the AI, is as much as possible to make the database as cultural as possible, right? Because otherwise, if the information is not there, knowledge is lost. And when knowledge is lost, we as humans, our own intelligences end up being less than the potential they could be. And what we want to do is increase the potential as much as possible in all of the AI tools.
Thank
No,
you.
there was, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
There was this discourse a while ago about the death of history or of historic writing, but it's just changing places. It's moving away from an elite group of people who narrate the story of our past, and it's moving into digital space with an ambition to be full of possibilities and without exclusion. That's the big vision that you were talking about in the beginning. And to me, it's just another proof of this huge paradigm shift that we're currently in. And it's very exciting because it's history live. If we even still want to call it history, you got to find a new name.
I think that's where, Yuval Noah Harari is right in that sense, because he says that, history isn't actually about the study of the past. It's actually about the making of the future, right? We need a certain amount of, history or anthropology in terms of context. So, for example, as I've been trying to understand how we got to, the binary logic and, these binary categories, I had to go, back in terms of, looking through the Western epistemology, everybody from Aristotle, Heraclitus, Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, Heidegger, Hegel, the whole panoply, Da Vinci, Newton, Dirac, everybody. And at the same time, I also had to go and, look into how Indian maths influenced the West. And so, we have to have that richness of context if, if our hope is essentially to build those technology futures that are inclusive of cultures, and that actually, cherish our values, our very human values together.
Here.
So the students, please speak up. Did you enjoy the accounting balance sheets, or as soon as you saw them, you just thought, oh no, this is class? Does anybody want to speak up? Don't be shy. Okay, everybody has gone shy. We're actually approaching time, I think, probably for the raffle prize. Raffle prize, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
And some people are living without prizes.
Exactly, that's a question I had. Who should be included now? Only the ones who are still on the call, or? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, no.
yes, the lucky winners.
Okay,
yes.
then let me just clean up the list real quick. Maybe you could just quickly share what it's about while I do the editing.
Okay.
Yeah, and can you say what the prize is for them?
Jane, can you please share what the prize is?
The prize is a Huawei watch. So it is, in developers' terms, it is one of the pieces of swag that everybody always wants. That and mobile phones, I think. Right, here we go. Over to Eva.
All right, let me spin that wheel. You can see your names there. Let's see where it will stop. Ooh, we have Narik.
Oh, congratulations. Please say hello to us, Narika.
Yeah, send your details to the Huawei team, and then you'll get your prize in the mail.
Yes, she is our HSD ambassador in Sweden. Very
Oh,
lucky.
hi. Thank you. Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, oh my God.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I'm so excited now. I'm just like, wow, it happened to me. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so I always enjoy the HSD events and HDG events. Everybody always, you know, it's one of those things where the fantastic thing about technology is that it touches so many of us and it affects so many of us, and so many of us can contribute to it. So it's not just, you know, whether or not you can engineer. The important thing is whether or not you have imagination, and all of us have imagination. And so what I hope is, you know, that after, you know, this evening's event, when you're on the bus, on the way back or walking, right? Think about culture, think about nature, breathe in, think and feel and sense what culture means to you, who you are, how it informs you, how it informs your relationships, and treasure it and value it and give thanks to it. Because, you know, appreciating yourself, your own soul, your own nature, right, is one of the most important things that we can do. And as much as possible, you know, regardless of whether or not you're really busy trying to work on an essay or trying to code something, always make time, 15 minutes a day, to go to the nearest park, right? Find a tree, place your hand on the tree, right? Place your hand on the tree and breathe, right? And you feel the tree breathing with you, right? Find a leaf on the tree, hold it in your hand, examine all of the wonderful life in the leaf, right? And place it against your own face and feel the life and the exchange and the communication between the leaf and between yourself. I mean, these are very simple things, but they're very, very important in terms of, you know, anchoring and rooting ourselves back into nature. You know, when we have so many artificial things around us, make the 15 minutes to connect with nature in a very tangible way, and connect with, you know, your own culture. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I want to encourage you all to, if you're studying accounting, look at the balance sheet differently, right? Every time you see face value or prices, use your imagination. Think what else could be in there, right? Because the world is our creation, right? And we can create these new technologies, these new tools, and these new hopes, essentially, for humanity. And so that's what I would encourage. And yes, join the Huawei developer group, because Kira, who's one of Huawei's fantastic engineers, knows lots of things about dimensions, space-time dimensions, and Unity platforms, right? And so, you know, there's just a wealth of tools that Huawei can provide. And I wanted my talk to be broad in terms of, you know, saying that these are the global opportunities, right? I mean, these are big opportunities ahead of us, because the current system, some of it works, a lot of it doesn't work. And for students, you know, the future is ours to co-create. So I would encourage you to learn about Hinduism, learn about Taoism, learn about your own cultures, include as much of, you know, culture and nature in everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're super inspiring, Twain. Thanks.
Thank you to all of you. You know, everything that we do for people, we do for each other. So go forth and do it for each other, and with each other. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Kira for talking to me in the first place at the developer day. And thank you to Jan for organizing this event. And, you know, the Huawei team are just amazing as a team. And yes, exactly. Go nature and culture. Yeah, that's what we should also do. We should, like, somebody should design a poster, go nature and culture. And that, you know, really, and then we can also design like a mascot. That would be the, you know, that would be like the fun project for the Huawei students. Design nature and culture mascot, and put it into a Unity game. Contact Kira and get Kira to teach you all about, you know, the Unity platform.
Yeah, I can say that.
And then, yeah, we can make a nature and culture game with our own game mascots, and the game mascot can represent each of our cultures.
Yeah, it can be very interesting. So yeah, we have a lot of ideas about games, so, and about games industry. So I hope that shortly we will share this information with all our students in Huawei student developer groups. Yeah,
fantastic.
So, but at the moment it's like we're not going to share this information. It's a kind of secret so far. Okay, Twain, thank you very much again.
Exciting. Thank you so much to everybody. Have a great evening, and take care. Take care of yourselves and take care of nature and culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, all.